Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first round of workshops here with the HESED lecture series this morning. Since it's now 10:15, we'll go ahead and get started. In this particular workshop, it is the Art of Faith-Based Activism, presented by Reverend Dr. Gregory Cuellar, who is an associate pastor of Old Testament here at Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary. Dr. Cuellar, we are so excited to hear what you have for us this morning, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Aiden, for the introduction. And I know it wasn't your intention, but you mentioned pastor. I do profess, but I also, interestingly enough, I am helping out as a pastor at a local church in San Marcos. So your words are prophetic. I wanted to use the time that has been given to me. Thank you to the organizers of HESED. I want to talk about the idea of the art of faith-based activism. And literally, I mean the art. But there's also some insight that I hope that you could glean, the audience, from my engagement in faith-based activism and how I discerned my engagement with faith-based activism, what started it, um, why am I interested in engaging in activism as a biblical scholar. So these are some of the overarching questions and ideas that I hope to intersect with this presentation. The name of the faith-based activist project that I'm engaged in is called Arte de Lagrimas, Refugee Artwork Project. The mission of this art project is a traveling art exhibit and archive aimed to bring public awareness to the lived experiences of asylum-seeking children, youth, and adults. We started this project in 2014 when we started to notice an influx of unaccompanied children and single adult families who were presenting themselves at the port of entry in McAllen, mainly in McAllen, but also Brownsville and Laredo. Texas really became one of the major areas, the Texas-Mexico border, where many of the asylum seekers from the Northern Triangle, Central America, were coming in and seeking asylum. And so the dramatic spikes in the numbers, though we've always had high numbers of asylum seekers presenting themselves at the U.S.-Mexico border, in 2014 really became a watershed moment where citizens in Texas began to ask questions about what was happening on the border, and we're also seeing ongoing coverage of unaccompanied children being placed in various holding cells that were questionable, and I'll touch on that a bit later. So, as a biblical scholar, of course, and a resident of Texas, living only 2.5 hours away from one major port of entry, Eagle Pass and Piedras Negras, I was certainly concerned. My wife, very concerned of what we were seeing on the news, and we have children of our own, and so thought, how can we get involved? We were noticing there were conflicting approaches to what was happening on the Texas-Mexico border, and thought it was important that we be present in some form that presents a witness of welcome to the asylum seekers. We wanted to be a part of a humanitarian effort, a faith-based effort that provided welcome to the unaccompanied children or the single parent families who were entering into the McAllen port of entry. And as you look at the journeys that many of these families and children are having to take, it's a 2,000-mile journey from the Northern Triangle through the heart of Mexico, and then move their way up toward the Texas-Mexico border, which really presents itself as the most logical first place of entry. But one of the things that they have to manage and navigate are the organized transnational criminal organizations that govern a lot of the territory that they're having to traverse on their way to the U.S. And here's a map of some of those territories that demarcate boundaries, cartel boundaries. And so this having to leave their homelands because of violence, they encounter much more violence along the way as they make their way to the U.S. And so we were seeing images on the news of children being held in very poor conditions. Here is a image that was circulated in the news of where the single parent families ended up once they were apprehended at the Texas-Mexico border. And a lot of the testimony we were receiving from these families was that these holding cells, which they referred to as leras or ice boxes, were really horrendous conditions, and very, very poor nutrition, very little to cover themselves. They keep these facilities very cold, so they're treated like animals, really dehumanized in this setting. So this, of course, spurred on a desire to want to engage in a humanitarian way, in a faith-based way, this reality that we find here in the state where we reside. And this is another image of unaccompanied children being placed in these cage-like structures. And again, this here really troubled us about how these families, having endured so much and were so vulnerable, were then being treated in a dehumanizing way in the U.S. So these we began to gather with a group of students, concerned citizens, people who were faith-based, who had a Christian, were rooted in some form of Christian tradition, and started to ask questions about how we could collectively go and be a part of a welcoming spirit, a welcoming movement, and at the Texas-Mexico border. And so what came to mind in our meetings in the summer of 2014 was this idea of art as a way to offer a testimony or a witness of welcome. We were noticing that at the time, various church-based humanitarian efforts, popping up along the Texas-Mexico border. One, I think, important humanitarian faith-based effort was the respite center that the Catholic Charities in McAllen had started with the leadership of Sister Norma Pimentel. We thought that would be a good place for us to go and volunteer, and thinking of art as a way of engaging the children and offering them that welcome and that spirit of hospitality. And so we went down to McAllen with an idea of what we would like to do. And me being a biblical scholar, so I'm called out really of the classroom to now enter into uh, uh, the public sphere, engaging this issue that we have happening on the Texas-Mexico border. And I'm coming with my own training and my own understanding of my faith. Of course, this seeing children caged, seeing these conditions sparked in us a desire to want to engage this issue that was happening on the Texas-Mexico border. And it wasn't the issue is not that there was migration. There's always been migration in the region. The issue had to do, or the problem had to do with how the U.S. government and how Border Patrol and how ICE were treating undocumented uh, migrants, how they were being caged, how they were given very little in terms of treatment when they arrived and when they were apprehended and placed in very inhumane conditions. So, as a biblical scholar, one who is rooted in an ethic that is prophetic, of course, that inspired my desire to want to engage in a more humanitarian effort, to offer a witness of welcome to these families who were showing up not too far from where we live in Austin. So the closest port of entry is Eagle Pass, and that would be about 2.5 hours from Austin. So this is right near where we live. Hearing about these stories, seeing the mass migration that was coming from Central America, and so me as one who has specialized as a biblical scholar on issues of exile, the themes of exile and return in the prophetic literature, I couldn't help but see the present day realities parallel with what I was teaching in the classroom about exile and about return. So there was this connection that I was making, and I felt the desire to push my teaching beyond just the biblical text and the classroom, and to now enter into the public sphere as an activist, as one who is wanting to participate in an effort, a humanitarian effort that would provide welcome to these families who were coming in at the McAllen port of entry. So we gathered, as I was mentioning, we gathered a group of faith-based students, clergy around the table, started talking about how we can engage and provide some witness of welcome to these families who were showing up at the Texas-Mexico border. And what came to mind for us had to do with art, right? We were, as a family, my wife and I, we've often kept the art of our children up on display, and that was a very important part of what we thought, how we could be present with children and their families and offer this welcoming spirit, combined with my own teaching as a biblical scholar, bringing what I've been constantly drawn to in the biblical text, these ideas of exile and return and journey and migration. So the biblical exilic themes of homeland and journey as viable art-making tasks for the Central American refugee children wanting ideas on what to draw. This is a bit of what we were thinking of, and we didn't know how to do it. We just had this idea of art. We also were thinking of calling what we're doing Arte de Lagrimas, art of tears, thinking of the children themselves, thinking of the families, how they're having to encounter violence on their way from Central America to the U.S., and the toil and just the level of violence that they have to encounter on the way leads to high levels of trauma that they're also developing as they come to the U.S. And so these themes, of course, are rooted in the biblical text. These are ideas that I've studied quite extensively in my own research. And we brought all of these ideas under this umbrella of Arte de Lagrimas over to McAllen to begin providing, to start to engage this issue of how they were being treated, how the asylum seekers and unaccompanied children were being treated. Now, the use of art is not a, in talking about migration, is nothing new when it comes to the region, the U.S.-Mexico border. Here, I'm thinking at, I'm thinking about the the tradition that has always been present within Mexican Catholicism, and that is the painting of these retablos. These retablos, these are narrative prayers that are offered in the churches where migrants, the home churches of migrants, when they return back, they usually offer these prayers as a token of appreciation, just commemorating what God has done, what a divine figure has done in helping them migrate safely to the U.S. and returning back home. So here you could see in this retablo how you have the person who is the primary author of this prayer gives thanks to Virgin Mary, and in this painting, the Virgin Mary is La Virgen de los Lagos. She is given, they give thanks that she had allowed for his group of fellow migrants to cross safely the Rio Grande. And this sort of has a really interesting image in that, for me as a biblical scholar, I'm thinking of course, the Exodus and how God parted the Red Sea in allowing safe passage for the Hebrews on dry land. And as I parallel that here with this image, the Virgin Mary is providing a safe passage by what it looks to be waters being shifted so that the migrants can cross safely. So this tradition of art making is part of the region. It's part of the cultural expressions, cultural productions of migrants, going back to this tradition of the retablos. So we were able to collect a large quantity of art supplies and packed them up and headed down to the respite center in McAllen with a group of volunteers. And here you could see this in this photo, the volunteers who were with us. These two young men here were actually math students, science students at UT that we were able to recruit. And there you have Lidia Hernandez, who is a former graduate of Austin Seminary. And so we went volunteering to help out at the respite center with our art supplies. We wanted to try and offer moments of just art making with the children who were there waiting, because when they were arrived at the respite center, they were given everything that they needed for the immediate journey to what would then be the sponsor home, usually a family member who would sponsor them, where they could wait with the family during the 21 days or so, where they had to present themselves to an immigration judge and present their case, their asylum case. So while they waited for their buses, or they were finishing up lunch, dinner, or breakfast, and they were in this moment of just waiting, that's when we would offer them opportunities to engage in art making. And we did this, the first trip, we did it at the Catholic Charities, and then the next time, and then we also provided some art making at the actual bus station there in McAllen, where, the families would, after they had eaten and they received replenished supplies for their journeys, hygienic supplies, clothes, a backpack, and were fed. Then they were brought back to the bus station, where they would then wait for their buses to be transported to wherever they were going to go in terms of the sponsor families. And here's where we would sit down with the children and wait with them, talk with them, offer them opportunities to draw, to color, and just learn about who they are, and be a welcoming spirit. Really, it's a witness of welcome, of kindness, of hospitality, is what we wanted to show these children, that not all of what they had encountered in the U.S. is reflective of everyone who lives in the U.S., that there are concerned faith based organizations, groups, people who have a different ethic, and would want them to know that they are children of God, and that they are welcomed and loved. And so this is what we've been able to do since 2014. We've been going back about once a year to the McAllen bus station or the respite center in McAllen. We've also been working with the respite center now in Brownsville. We also did some work in San Antonio at the bus station. But the art that we were able to do with some the children, many times they would give us the art, and we would, as a gift of appreciation for just being there with them. And that art is what we used, right, for what would become Arte de Lagrimas. When someone gives you a gift, it's important, they're sharing something with you. We felt it was important for us to share it with others, that we weren't going to keep it to ourselves, but we were going to share it with others. And regardless of what they gave us, whether it be just a photo, a drawing of just marks, or scribbles, or a pillow, whatever they would give us, we thought we wanted to make sure we valued it, and we showed appreciation by letting them know that we would share it with other people of faith, so that they could pray for them. And this dynamic of receiving their art, and the obligation that we had, the ethical obligation to be good stewards of that gift, by sharing it with other people of faith, we started to develop this traveling exhibit. Some of the art that we've been gifted, they include, the journeys of many of these asylum seekers. And so we have really not just art about different topics and themes, but we have art that speaks to the theme of journey and homeland. And in this particular art piece, you could see how the artist here, Mirna, gives thanks to God. Another key element that we saw in this art was that there was a strong component of faith that was expressed in the artwork. Here's another piece where one of the artists, often the artist would ask what to draw, and we would hone in on those two themes that I talked to you about at the beginning: exile and our journey and homeland. And we would tell them, well, draw your journey. And so this particular art piece is one that is done by Genesis. She draws this, first started off, as you could see here, she started off with the ice box that I mentioned, where she was held when she came to the U.S. And then she proceeded to draw the police officers, the border patrol, who apprehended her, and then the little boat right there in the middle, that she and her mom and her little brother had to take this makeshift boat, in order to cross the Rio Grande. And I asked her if there was anyone there with her, anyone else other than her immediate family, and she said God was there. So this is a image of God that she drew there near the sun. She wanted to also make sure that the God had a little facial hair, so she drew the God here with uh, a little bit of chin facial hair. And so she then wanted to draw another drawing, and she asked what to draw. We said, well, draw us your house. And so she then proceeded. Genesis drew her house, and you could see here her families together, her all of the spaces that her and her brother used to play in that she had to leave behind. And so these images, this art that we've been gifted, we felt it necessary to show it, to exhibit it to churches, and to have them have their story be told with the aim that people of faith would be moved, if anything, to pray for the families, pray for the people of Central America, and be engaged in terms of their own consciousness, be aware of how they're seeing their stories, right? These are just little snippets of their view of what they had to encounter and what they left behind and how they see the world and how they believe. But nevertheless, it comes from them. So having these images enter into the imaginary of people of faith, and that they would be led to engage in positive ways, if anything, to be part of the welcoming efforts that are needed in along the border, rather than heightened militarization, to have people of faith have empathy for many of the families who are having to undergo enormous odds and confront violence at a depth many of us are not familiar with. And so these pieces we've been able to organize over the years and create exhibits. So we have these very small exhibits that we can set up at conferences or at institutions. Most of the institutions we've targeted have been institutions of faith. So we've had exhibits at seminaries. Here's one that we were able to have at McCormick Theological Seminary in Chicago. Here's an exhibit that we had at a church, Methodist church in Austin. And you could see how the artwork there just surrounds the worship space. We were able to put up an exhibit at Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary. So these are some of the efforts that we've been engaged in now that we've been gifted over 100 plus art pieces, and taking these art pieces, putting them in, matting them, and putting them on display. And these spaces of faith have been part of the activist movement that we're engaged in, raising the consciousness, helping people become more aware about their side of the story. And this doesn't even capture the whole side of what they're encountering, but it gives, at least it interferes just a bit with the main narratives that we are constantly being given and presented on main mass media. So since the pandemic, we've had to reduce the in-person exhibits, suspend a number of our in-person exhibits, and we then have moved to trying to put this art online, make it available to the public using this virtual showroom. And Aiden Diaz has been very instrumental in helping us with this virtual showroom that you can go into and now look in a virtual way at a lot of the art and get the descriptions, the first name of the artist, the countries that they come from. So this is something that I invite you to do. And also Aiden had helped us with these podcasts that set the context, where we're bringing voices from activists to theologians, church historians, to talk about what's going on in the borderlands. So this is another resource that we have made available. And we are thankful for a grant that we received from the Henry Luce Foundation and the Institute for Diversity and Civil Life that provided us the monies to be able to digitize all of the art and make it available in this virtual showroom. So when I talk about the art of faith-based activism, literally this is the art, right, of activism that my wife and I have been engaged in since 2014. And so I want to open up the space to any questions that you may have. We can enter into some discussion here in the brief time that we have left.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Cuellar. Um, if you have any questions for Dr. Cuellar, you're welcome to put them in the Q&A section here in the session, or you can put them in the chat. I do see that we do have one question already from Biz Thornton. I'm really touched by the thoughtfulness and intentionality of this project as a holistic piece of activism. Did anything surprise you during the process of planning or enacting it?
Yes, thank you for that question. And I want to say that the process was very organic, and we were really trying to go with what the Spirit was leading us to do. And the name itself, I'll tell you this, as we were meeting for, we had one or two meetings with the group of volunteers that we were trying to organize with, and sat at the table. We were thinking of what we wanted to name this project, and off to the distance, our youngest daughter, she was there, and she started to need some attention. And of course, for a toddler needing attention, sometimes they could express themselves through tears. And that's what was happening. We were hearing her begin to cry, wanting our attention, and us talking about the children there at the Texas-Mexico border, and thought, well, why don't we call it Art of Tears, Arte de Lagrimas? So it was these various elements were coming into play, and of course, as people of faith, it's attributing those moments to a spiritual movement that we see guiding the process. But I think one of the that is a surprise, is how things were coming together, and seeing the churches rally around what we wanted to do. We had churches from all the various mainline Protestant traditions, offer us art supplies, and so that was encouraging and surprising that people genuinely wanted to engage in this project and offer their support. I think that also I guess on the negative side, we didn't anticipate being shocked by the level of trauma that was apparent on the faces of many of the asylum-seeking mothers and fathers, that when you are present there with them and you genuinely see them, what you are a witness to is what they carry on their demeanor and on their facial expressions. What they've seen, you can see it in their eyes. What they have, the level of trauma that they have, incurred over the duration of the journey. It's just you don't really know that kind of trauma, and even seeing it for us and feeling it wasn't in any way capturing its totality. It is something that does shake you, and it moves you. And often we would go back to our rooms at the end of the day and just break into tears, um, be overwhelmed by it.
Thank you for that. As we continue to offer up our questions for Dr. Cuellar, um, I guess one of the things that is for me is how often are you able to go down to the border and to do this work? And if and with that, I can understand like the pandemic has might have changed up that scheduling for you. But how do others get involved in this kind of work with
Mm-hmm.
you as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we have taken students with us down to the border. We usually try to take a small group and to allow for there to be, you know, a manageable. Um, as we go down, we want to be able to have the right people in place because of what we encounter does take a lot out of you. And when the more people that you have going with you, you're having to manage the emotional impact of their what they experience, and that can sometimes dilute the concentrated efforts that we're trying to accomplish. It's being there with the children, and there are other organizations around us that we are collaborating with, and also helping out their efforts, helping with their efforts. But when it comes to this, the actual sitting with the children and speaking with them does require a very unique uh, calling and personality. We been able to increase the faith parameters of this work beyond just thinking of it as a Christian tradition. So we've had Usama Malik has been one of our volunteers, and he comes from a Muslim tradition to be there with us, engaging in the children and offering these sessions of art for the children. So interfaith is now becoming part of what we would like to do. The pandemic has made it difficult to do the in person exhibit. So much of what we've been doing, and Aiden, you've been part of this, is to get 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 this archive out online. But as you know, we're starting to see the the pandemic lessen. We hope to return back to doing these exhibits in churches. And so, if you are part of a church who would be interested in hosting Arte de Lagrimas, so that may be one direct way that you could participate, and that we could partner with your church, and we'll go and set up this art in whatever space you have available. Leave it with your church for we try to give them a maximum of about 1 or 2 months to stay with it, where the members are able to see and read and absorb the stories and the images. So that could be a way to engage. The other way, I think, is it doesn't necessarily have to be with us, but there are a number of very reputable, ethical, faith-based activists who are working daily on the Texas-Mexico border that you could go and engage with. And I could give you some of those organizations. Maybe I'll give them to you, Aiden, and you could send a list out.
Of course, I'll be glad to do it. And also with those podcasts you've done, you've also highlighted some of those voices
Mm-hmm.
as well. So,
Yes.
yes. Another question from David Angulo. Having been to both the bus station and some of the respite centers at the border, I was able to see a lot of need at the physical level: clothes, food, shelter, etc. What needs does art fulfill for the kids?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. Um, you know, we wanted to, as we had engaged in this project, the material needs of families took priority, right? So it's how can we be able to, how can we enter into what's happening at these respite centers as facilitators of the, meeting their physical needs. So that was it's always been at the forefront of what we've been doing. Now, once that is fulfilled for the day, right, the children find themselves wandering, not just wandering physically, but wandering in their minds. Like, okay, now I can see. Uh, you could tell that they have a curiosity. They've been fed, they have showered, maybe slept, were able to sleep for 24 hours, and now wake up to the day, wake up, and their minds are curious. And so, as a parent and also an educator, being able to see when children are wanting to engage and wanting to um, move beyond just I need to be fed. It's I need some relationship here. Who are you? Kind of the inquisitive mindset. And once that happens, that's where the need of offering them a box of colors and a blank paper becomes a tool for creating an encounter where their inquisitive mind and their curiosity about who you are and your desire to want to also um, know who they are and encounter them in a genuine way. The art becomes that connecting moment so that their curiosity is met, although it's not complete, but it's sparked. And so that's where we feel that the need is being, in terms of their own inquisitive, curious um, disposition, is what we're able to come in and offer some encounter.
Thank you for that. We have one last question. I recognize we are at 11 o'clock now, but we will take the last question before we move into a break time. This one is from Carson Crawford. After seminary and God willing ordination, it is my plan to return to my native Appalachia, placing me over 1,000 miles away from the border. How can those of us a sizable distance away from the border offer support beyond just praying?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think this is where our project is we're interested in those who are removed geographically from what we feel and see and hear um, on an immediate level in Texas. We wanted to be able to provide churches, communities a different narrative, and that maybe you could do it with our project, right? By inviting your church community, your faith community, access to the virtual showroom, or you yourself can go into the community you live in and hear from the people themselves. Because whether you're in rural areas or in urban areas, you're going to find migrants. You're going to find either documented or undocumented. This is a land um, filled with migration narratives, and hearing from those who are there in your community, their stories. How is it that they arrived? What were their struggles? And you'll also discover that many of those who are coming from Central America have very strong faith convictions. So you could enter into a discussion not just on the social, but on the theological level, how God helped them. and then that discussion becomes so much more rich. And you also that is a point, that's a counter narrative immediately. The theological component to their stories is a very strong counter narrative to what you may be hearing on the news, which is, that they're pouring in. The crime is pouring in. The drugs are pouring in, and they're infecting our society. They are ravaging our society, right? That is the normative narrative, and you're seeing that more and more, especially during this time of election, that they're pouring in. Well, if you go to the Texas-Mexico border, you're not going to see that pouring in, right? It's not flooded with criminals. These are people. These are children, and so getting a different story, a different narrative, very important. It's an important work that you can do where you're at.
Dr. Cuellar, thank you so much for this presentation and your time today and answering all of our questions. We are at the end of time with this particular workshop. If you have about a 12-minute break before our next round of workshops begin, and you'll find yourself going back to the sessions tab over on this side of your screen to enter our next two rounds of workshop from Reverend Jennifer Cumberbatch and Dr. Kyrie Williams. Thank you so much again for joining us today, and we'll see you in a few more minutes.